And Olivia is a Brooklyn-based designer and maker currently working at local projects uh, oh, as a visual experience designer, creating museums and exhibitions for organizations like the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission, Futures Without Violence, and Museum of Jewish Heritage. Olivia, we are super excited to have you here today. So without further ado, let's take it away.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate everybody showing up. And I'm also just honored to be like the first human being to have in person for your lecture series. So considering everything with COVID. So yes, this is my design. This is my talk, Design with Care. I am a designer and maker currently working at as a visual experience designer at local projects, like Grace mentioned. I get to work with all sorts of people to design exhibits and museums. I graduated in 2019 from the University of Connecticut School of Fine Arts in graphic design. And a bit of background of just who I am. I was always a bit of a bookworm and just really liked understanding how different things worked. But it was always through a very creative lens. And during my time at UConn, I was almost a biology major, but all those different things that I studied really just taught me about the importance of well-rounded thinking. And I came into art school knowing that I loved sculpture and graphic design. And my little cursor over here. And I learned how those different ways of thinking could actually work together. And I was really lucky to have really amazing professors and staff that encouraged me to nurture both ways of thinking in my design work. So designing with care is really a simple way to explain how I approach all of my design work and how I will be structuring this talk. This little scale man is someone that I'm always copying and pasting into all the work that I do. He's present in every day of my life and my work. And this is just how we lay out our flat elevations. We present our designs, annotating different heights and codes for fabrication. But anyway, what does designing with care really mean? Across all these different scales of design that I work with, good design requires you to design with care and consideration and understanding of your viewer. So I'm just going to walk you through what this looks like from whether it be a museum or an exhibit, an object or a small experience, or the little typographic decisions that you make when designing or when responding to a design brief. So let's start big. How to design a museum. This left photo is a photo of local projects inside the studio. It's very chaotic at the moment. It's been taken over by different prototypes since we don't work full-time in studio anymore. And this other photo is of my first day of work because I started the first day that local projects went fully remote when the pandemic first hit in 2020. So, which was a very crazy time to start working at a studio designing museums when I couldn't go to museums for almost a year. But over the course of that year, I worked on Groom the Rising, which opened on the Centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm currently working on the Courage Museum that will be in San Francisco for a nonprofit called Futures Without Violence. And it's aimed to educate people on the cyclical nature of violence and show visitors how they can build and develop their courage muscle so they can have a part in stopping and ending that cycle. And I'm also supporting on the design of a children's gallery for a Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. And we just wrapped up a concept phase for a gallery at the Sydney Jewish Museum in Australia. So these are all the different teams at local projects. And it would really take about like 10 or so other people getting up here to explain their roles to really paint the full picture of what it takes to design a museum from beginning to end. So I'm just one of those many people, and the content team, the visual experience design team, and the physical design team are kind of described as these three legs of that stool that drive this work. So we are like the story that you read and experience, space that you walk through, and everything that you see. So we also have a creative technology team as well. They're incredible, and they bring to life all the interactives and have all this knowledge about all the hardware that goes into those media experiences. And our UX team is responsible for user experience design consideration, both physically and digitally. And all of these people come together thanks to the love and patience of project managers that make sure that all of these creatives are functioning properly. And as a visual experience designer, I am working across all different mediums. The title is very fitting, visual experience, because I'm really working on any number of these things at the same time, from the physical exhibit design, the media, and the interactives that go into the museum. This is a very oversimplified process of what it takes to design a museum from start to finish. And this is still an oversimplified but slightly more accurate overview of that process, because it requires so many people and experts and community members to make that happen. But overall, physical content and design are always working together every step of the way. So starting with concept, we work with an organization or nonprofit to figure out what they want to physically manifest, what story they want to tell, and what they want their visitors to walk away with. And then we move into actual script writing, where almost like a book, the entire museum copy gets and experience gets written, and design begins to develop in response to that conceptual approach. This is where we start to kind of build out our visual system, more in application, all in parallel with the actual space being designed. Sometimes we have an existing building, but for example, for Greenwood Rising, that building was built for the project itself. So we were able to then start playing with flat elevations, outlining what media is needed, developing different media briefs, just if we need to reach out to vendors, if we cannot produce something in-house. And then in documentation and final design, we prepare all of our work, because then we begin that relationship with fabricators of the space to then move into production. And somehow after years of work, we finally hit install. And this is an entire museum, pretty much, all of the flat elevations for Greenwood Rising. And get to work with content team to kind of lay out these story beats along these flat pages, and making sure that we're hitting all of our typographic hierarchy systems here throughout the entire museum. After doing those flat elevations, I prototype, so doing small printing samples or maybe a full section of a wall, and I'm the average height of a visitor for a children's gallery, which is very helpful when we're documenting. But yeah, it's really just important to get a sense of scale in real life versus our flat and design documents, because we always design so much bigger digitally. And this is kind of where all that knowledge about standard heights, legibility, and accessibility are actualized, making sure that everything is comfortable for the viewer. And then the museum or exhibit gets built. This is a result of what felt like hundreds of people just from our team, from the community, the experts and historians, and all the wonderful individuals within the organization to spearhead this, plus the vendors and the fabricators, and also just the sheer amount of people that go into constructing this. So this work is a product of years of those conversations with the community that we designed for, so that we make sure that we understand their story and to do it justice, and make sure that it is something that they are proud of. Because these spaces have a lot of power. And I really love this quote from Baratunde Thurston, who has a great podcast called How to Citizen. But he explains the importance of storytelling in changing systems. And for Greenwood Rising, it was a space that it tells this story, but it also archives this important history. And in its existence, it's also a place for survivors and their descendants to come, since so much of that in history was lost in the massacre. And it's for the Greenwood community as a whole, including those whose hearts we are aiming to change to create a better reality. So I'm going to walk through a bit about Greenwood Rising. It is a history center about Black Wall Street and its full story. It is about the spirit of the Greenwood community. So if you don't know about the historic event in 1921, a group of white residents in Tulsa destroyed this thriving African-American neighborhood, flattening about 35 blocks and killing over 300 people. And as a result, displacing so many more. And it was covered up by the state and federal government, and is often not taught in our schools. So this project was a result, it's a legacy project of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission, which began in 2015. And the center tells the story of the massacre, but also what Black Wall Street was like before and after, all to help catalyze important conversation around racial reconciliation and restorative justice. And throughout the experience, we show the visitors both past and present. So this museum is located on the corner of Greenwood and Archer in historic Black Wall Street. And these are screens in the entry gallery that shows street views of this area at its peak in the early 1900s and that blend back into views of present day. There is also an intro film by local filmmaker Trey Thaxton that just captures the spirit and talent of this community that exists today and its historic roots. And the first gallery that you walk into is called Greenwood Spirit, and it tells the story of the beginning of Greenwood, where it all started and why this community came to Tulsa. There's a large projection map piece that shows Greenwood starting from grassy plains, the building of oil derricks, and ending on bustling storefronts. So the end of the loop becomes the front of a barbershop. And so when you walk through that door, you enter a period barbershop. And visitors can sit and in the barbershop chairs and listen to these oral histories of what life was like for the folks of Greenwood at its peak, still facing racial oppression. And as you enter the second part of this museum, you start this other narrative arc called Arc of Oppression, which covers 3 galleries. But at this point, we also offer visitors an alternative exit due to just the triggering nature of the content that lies ahead of it. But this tells, this emotional exit also still offers the full story of what they otherwise would read, but they do not have to watch any of the media pieces or see any haunting artifacts that are in this space. So this route offers also offers supportive material about historical racial trauma and working through triggers. And the gallery that follows that is the Systems of Anti-Blackness space. It is a timeline both of national and local historic events that led up to the massacre. And you can also see the key media piece that follows it. So this piece displays survivor accounts and the reality of the massacre through an interpretive media piece. It is projection mapped onto 3 standing pillars and the back gallery dividing wall. And the media piece gives visitors a sense of the full story arc of what happened before and during, and the little that was left of the community after the massacre. And after this media piece is a section about the aftermath and rebuilding, but it was not complete when we got all the photos taken of the space. But I want to mention it just because it's so important as part of the story, where we just highlight the response and lack of response that the community received, as well as key leaders who stayed behind to rebuild. And then in the following gallery, Changing Fortunes, we talk about the continued strength over the last 80 years as Greenwood ebbs and flows through various economic success through the civil rights movement and urban renewal. And this dimensional wall kind of speaks to those ebbs and flows of positive and negative histories. This is a photo from install. You can see the plywood that's still in the back, but there was also a signage installation where we got to redesign all of these old signs and create artifact cases to highlight key leaders and businesses. And the ending of the experience includes a dialogue space for visitors and for the museum itself to also hold events, and ends on an opportunity to contribute your voice and make a pledge to contribute to change. This whole process happened during the pandemic, as we're all reminded again and again of our country's racist history and the anti-Black systems that continue to exist and the results of the lack of actions to dismantle those systems. And as we were designing Greenwood Rising, we were always having conversations around this history and the change that we wanted to create. And every museum and exhibit is different, but it really is just a process focused around listening, being a well-rounded designer so that you can hear and respond and not just react with what you know how to do, but learn from the community that you're serving and how they need you to do your work. So the Systems of Anti-Blackness space is just a really great example of this collaborative work. I was one of the 2 designers on this project, and this was one of the galleries that I led the design of. It was a lot to tackle just from even a physical design standpoint. We wanted to include artifacts, making sure that across these 3 bands, that the timeline itself was aligning. We had various changing wall dimensions, considering that the museum itself was actively being built as we were designing it. But it also hits at such a critical point of the experience because it laid the historical groundwork of what led to the massacre. The linear timeline starts at 1619, and it's broken up across these 3 systems of oppression, social, economic, and political. And it also includes these keywords that help the visitor kind of follow the progression of history. And the space was possible and successful because it was a result of that working relationship. We would have weekly meetings and work with these historians and leaders to make sure that it felt exactly as it should to represent this history and their work and to serve the visitor. So these relationships are really what lead to successful and impactful design. I like the word relationship here because it's not only about the people that you work with, but your relationship to your viewer and the ideas that you work with and how you nurture them. So I'm going to go backwards a bit now and just talk about some of the work that led me to do what I currently do now. So all of my museum work and exhibit design work is really built on a foundation and infatuation of understanding how different objects and places make us feel and our relationship to them, and also my role in their creation. So as a designer, I'm interested in understanding our physical and visual world and its power to kind of hold parts of ourselves, whether it be our memories or our stories that in a way, as a designer, I can never create those memories for someone, for example, but I can work to facilitate that kind of thinking and reflection. So this quote is from a reflection specialist at MoMA, and I think it summarizes that beautifully. But this is something that I know you guys are not unfamiliar with just after watching some of your mood videos in the previous class, but that kind of reflection requires empathy, and you must understand yourself to understand others. So learning about the role empathy plays in design was a turning point for me, and finding the kind of stories that I wanted to tell in my design work. This turning point happened during my sophomore year after I kind of experienced the first and most painful loss of my life. I had lost my dad very unexpectedly, and that loss really made me see my world very differently now that it was missing a very important person in it. But it was still full of all the things that they had left behind. So I developed a really deep connection to these otherwise mundane objects that then started to kind of be these, they in of themselves held all of these memories of my dad. And I developed a far deeper understanding of empathy as part of my practice. And I saw my work as a way to connect people to themselves and to others, and to their world to make them more present. So my junior year, I had taken a class where I was introduced to woodworking and making spoons, and I became obsessed really with making these everyday objects because it was really hard to make a spoon, and make a spoon that really actually felt like a spoon. And I think we all know that feeling of using something that's clunky or poorly designed. And I also had realized that I'd been taking for granted all of these like key human design understandings in my everyday things that I was using. So I became really fixated on this consideration that is embodied in everyday things like furniture and chairs. And I applied for a research grant to build furniture, which was very naive of me considering I'd only made spoons before. But I was very lucky, and I got to work with our woodshop tech, Gary Cruson, every day for almost a year practically. It felt like an apprenticeship that I did under him, which was just really such a gift to learn from such an amazing craftsman. And my project was called Making Welcome. And I designed and built a full dining set, a pair of armchairs, and also threw a full set of ceramic tableware. And it was really a study of the material, of all the standard measurements that go into our everyday objects that make them comfortable to use, and that feeling of what invites people into a space. And yeah, I really just felt like a student to these different materials, and wanted to celebrate their natural beauty. So I really love this project so much because it was also just about the act of breaking bread with people and orchestrating a space for conversation. I made this teapot and didn't put a handle on it because my clay had dried too quickly, but I also made 2 other teapots that had handles, but I picked this one because you have to wrap it in cloth when it's hot and pour it with both hands. And I just really loved that offering gesture. And during the week that the work was on display in our art building gallery, my mentor, Gary, and my other mentor, Ray, we would sit at the table in the afternoons and invite anyone passing by to join us for a cup of tea. And the quiet gallery setting was just really an incredible space for this warm wood dining set. It was really sweet to watch people approach the work so gently, knowing that everything was handmade. And small talk just naturally did not have a place here. I met professors that I'd never had before, heard their stories, and there were many tears and laughs that happened here that were so special. All of the conversations that happened at that table were really the entire purpose of the project and something that I couldn't have created alone. And that project was really a study of the beauty of our everyday and how the projects around us serve, or how the objects around us serve us. And I really love this quote, and this part of this quote. There's no greater opportunity for appreciating beauty than through use in our daily lives. No greater opportunity for coming into direct contact with the beautiful. Bless you. Our everyday objects are beautiful because we use them, and because they get scratches and scars that reflect how we live and the people that we live with, and just the way that they reflect us. So the Making Welcome project really showed me the power of design to offer a mirror to people. It taught me how to show and not just tell, and how design can be a conversation with the viewer rather than at them. So all of that laid the groundwork for my senior thesis, which I did on the junk drawer. And that project really focused more on how objects are a reflection of our identity and how the junk drawer kind of acts as this passive time capsule of the mundane parts of our lives. I just really wanted to make people think lovingly about this quirky, almost nesting-like behavior that we all share, of accumulating all these little odds and ends in our homes. So I compiled all of my research about why we collect things and our relationships to stuff in a book, along with a complete catalog of all the objects in my childhood home junk drawers. I organized it by room in my house that it came from, and it was really sweet to see that the drawer that my mom would often put things reflected her daily routines, her love for food and cut flowers, just full of all those little flower food packets or clips from orchids that she bought or matches from restaurants she'd been to. And in my dad's office drawer, it had little Father's Day gifts from the past 20 years and combs from toiletry bags that he would get from traveling for work, or funny office supplies he accumulated, but probably also never used. And I built this box to house all of that research. I had a piece that was just a recording of myself talking about collecting things, and about what I had learned from going through all the drawers in my house. I also had an animation on one side and a drawer that had little buttons you could take. And this built thing was really just a junk drawer in of itself for people to poke through. This is a photo of what the box actually looked like the day of the show, which is just also a reminder to get good documentation of your work, because I really wish I had a better photo than this. But the top of the box had a bunch of just stuff that really could have been in anyone's junk drawer. And it was really interesting just to see what people resonated with, like the unknown chords or tangled headphones, and the emergency poncho people kept coming back to. All of these not important enough to put somewhere else, but important enough not to throw away. Yeah, and it was just really humbling to see how people responded to the random junk in a more fond way. Like they were excited to see stuff that they were also hanging on to. And before I knew it, I graduated somehow, and I moved to New York. And I knew I wanted to continue doing physical design work, but I didn't really know what that would look like. I worked at an agency really briefly because I just wanted to try a bunch of different things. And the first project that I'd worked on was a brand awareness campaign for SiriusXM that had launched in New York and LA and Nashville, which was really exciting just to see the work in the real world itself. But my favorite part of creating this identity system was just all the different outputs, and seeing the work projected onto buildings or onto a truck, or how the system worked at a pop-up event. So I knew I really liked creating experiences, but I also realized I didn't like branding in a traditional sense. And I remembered a project that I worked on towards the end of my undergrad experience for the MFA show identity that we had. It was called Close Third Person, which is a literary term that describes the retelling of a story from another character's perspective, which was just a really beautiful brief to get. And this project is really what led me into reading more about graphic design for museums and exhibits, and how you could create a visual system that kind of captures someone's body of work. So I ended up getting connected to a friend of my cousin's husband, who's someone who had a friend that worked at local projects. And I basically have been spending the last 2 years at local projects learning how to design exhibits and museums and their visual systems. And one of my first projects was the visual identity for the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library that we're working on. It's going to be in the Badlands of North Dakota. And I got to do lots of research about Theodore Roosevelt and cowboys and the beautiful land that the center will be based on. And this identity is for the library itself, but It's also just the backbone for the visual identity system that the entire Experience Center library will be based on. And hopefully it's gonna be opening in like 2025. So that is kind of the path that got me to where I am now at Local Projects. And this last section is really just about some key ideas that drive my process and how they manifest in the design decisions that I make, down to the type that I like to pick. I really love this Marx quote. I think it's really kind of arrogant in the way that it suggests that the senses are historical and therefore some kind of human accomplishment. And I think it's beautiful to think that our senses are not just how we respond and make sense of the world, but they are a powerful source of material memories for us to pull on. So, which is just another tool for designers to use because we all share these senses. So designing with care in this way means being aware of the world outside of a traditional or technical aesthetics mindset, and use this kind of material library to create something beautiful and meaningful from a curiosity of what makes us human. In undergrad, I really became interested in comfort and the way that we anthropomorphize things. Did a lot of research on comfort objects and their roles in our lives from childhood also into adulthood. And I created comfort objects that were around the size of a baby. They had this little seam on their back that kind of gave them a little bottom, a little rump. And these long, long arms and legs that let you wrap them around you, make them hug you. And all of these design details and decisions made people hold them lovingly and like cuddle them. And I left them all in the library during finals week. And my fellow college students became children again in the loving way that they were dancing with them and wrapping them around their necks and heads. And many of them told me that they felt soothed and calmed by their presence. And I also became interested in the political nature that some objects can have or adopt. For example, what the blanket can make us think about as an object. It is a basic form of shelter and comfort and protection against the elements, but it can also ask us what it means to live, to be human, to live alongside others, what we might define as comfortable and how we decide to respond to that awareness of others suffering or experiencing discomfort. And discomfort and visitor well-being was at the center of our conversations when designing Greenwood Rising. When we were discussing the inclusion of a content warning, it was also immediately clear that we needed to create an emotional exit opportunity, or just to create options for the visitor. We wanted to make sure that we were, of course, presenting the full truth of these ideas, but we did not want to create any kind of environment where people felt like they had to go through these media pieces and not have a way out. So we knew the content would be painful and uncomfortable to witness, but we also wanted to care for the community that could have historical racial trauma in facing the content itself. We really owed it to the visitors to offer that option, or at least that opportunity to exit and re-enter if they decided to do so. And this is a result of knowing the visitor and tending to their needs, and those hours of conversations with experts and community leaders, especially when you're not a member of that community. This is one of the last points I wanted to end on as I talk about typography, because I think it really ties everything together nicely. As a designer, you cannot do any of this alone in isolation. We are all inspired by others and the precedent of creative thinking that creates the world around us. So something has always gotten you there, even if it's just passively absorbing that inspiration. And really to not acknowledge all that history and hard work that's been done before you stunts the creative breath that you can have. So learning about history that is woven into everything around us only enriches the work that we do as designers, which is why we do research, as I'm sure all of your professors already remind you to do, but it's incredibly important because when designing with care, it also just means that we really never do any of this alone, and we have to always nod to that work. So let's now talk about type, because it's also an incredible embodiment of human history and storytelling in the way that we communicate. Like all other forms, letter forms embody these different personalities and histories. So for example, for the identity system for Greenwood Rising, we used a stencil typeface for the logo and its dimensional lettering just throughout the experience. And in the full typographic hierarchical system, it's really based on the concept and importance of brick and mortar historically for the community, as well as just the visual language of activism with the inclusion of condensed typography. And the system itself is centered around the spirit of Greenwood and the importance of brick and just representing the physical and emotional strength of Greenwood as they built back so many times, especially after the massacre itself. So I love typography. This is why I love letters and what they are capable of. Just like any other tool that we have, they make the intangible tangible. And during quarantine, I made this typeface Roxy. And I used every letter as an opportunity to try something new. My job always has me thinking really big and really small all the time. So it was really nice to have a design exercise to approach each letter in its own way. I sketched out each letter either in a sketchbook or on my iPad, and I would vectorize it in Illustrator and then extrude it on Tinkercad. And I had impulsively bought a 3D printer during quarantine because I really missed making objects. So I started printing my letters, which led to the extruded weight of the typeface itself. So each letter really was a way for me to appreciate different details of it. They were inspired by things in my personal life, just people around me, other typographic anatomy that I wanted to exaggerate, or a designer's work that I loved, sometimes various walks through the Met or bike rides, literally anything. They were just these like little letter sculptures of all the visual fodder that I had accumulated over quarantine. And I like ending on this project because I gave so much love to each of these little letters. And I would ask and argue with my roommates all the time about them. They were my creative sounding board. And the letters really became a reflection of my bubble, both creatively and socially, and captures my favorite parts of my creative process. Which involves lots of research, lots of talking, and lots of listening and looking at our world with a loving eye. So thank you guys so much for listening to us. Yes. Now, if you guys have any questions.
Yeah. Let's see if there's any questions on Zoom.
I don't think so.
Okay, no. But yeah, if anybody has questions, feel free to raise your hand if you're in person, or if you're on Zoom, you can use the raise hand function or just unmute, and we will do our best to answer.
Thank you guys for sitting through that. And I breezed through a lot. So. Oh, hi. Sorry.
I'm really curious. So I'm at the platform. I'm really curious. Like, what is the discrepancy between the conceptualization phase and the implementation phase? Are there a lot of like logistics that hold you all back?
I think, I mean, there are so many variables, whether it be budget, obviously sometimes, and also like from a sustainability standpoint for the organization, maybe some museums might lean towards having more analog approach or solution, just because from like a maintenance standpoint, they might not have like an IT team or something in-house. But yeah, I mean, budget is definitely something. And also, I mean, besides the point of just like what might be a right answer for something to do, a big media piece might not be super fitting for certain topics. Just also from, what you might want to create as an experience. We want to shock people, or do we want to ease them into the content. So yeah, there's so much from actual concept into implementation that we're always talking about. So yeah, I hope that was a good kind of answer to that. It's so many things, but budget is unfortunately also one of them. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So for the Greenwood Rising space, I was there on install and opening day. We did like a soft opening on the Centennial. So it was just open to descendants and survivors as well. But that conversational space is, I can go back to the photo of it. But it's just a round space with pillows, but we just wanted to make sure that there was opportunity at some point in the experience for people to be able to just sit because there's really not seating throughout. Yeah, so we just wanted to offer an opportunity at the end of the experience for people to gather. And we also included these other walls that we could put other like printed material. So just if there's any current information that's being produced or any other supportive like books and whatnot. When it came to actually testing it, we didn't really do any actual testing. It was more just relying on like the key human behavior of having this like rounded seating space. But the day that it actually opened, a lot of people did end the experience and hang out here. And we overheard a lot of really beautiful conversations from descendants, especially just because a lot of this history was lost and so many people went so many different other places that a lot of them just talked about the museum kind of functioning as a place that they can come back to. And it was interesting, and a lot of the overlaps that people were talking about, that like whether their great uncle had a shop there, and it was just really interesting, and a lot of the people that actually hung around in that space and realized the different overlaps that they had in their family history. So in function, it did work really beautifully, which we're just absolutely thrilled by. So yeah. Yeah. It depends on the project. A lot of the time, the organization that we're working with itself will offer a bit about what they know about their visitors. So especially if it's an existing museum, a lot of them already do a lot of this research just about their visitorship and the kind of people who are coming in, whether it be like school groups or just like the loose age range that we might be having to approach. With something like Greenwood Rising, there wasn't really a lot of an understanding kind of going into that. So it was just more, again, those conversations that we had with the community to make sure that we knew them as best we could so that we were kind of ready for anything and whoever was going to walk in. So yeah, sometimes it exists, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the work you showed us today is like really cool. I think one part being that a lot of times you want to see our work in context in action. So I guess considering like the work you've done, like what do you think in your experience and maybe the skills of your work has best prepared you to be able to like bring your work from like black to like what kind of transition help make that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in actualizing that work, obviously just from a technical standpoint, having like any kind of woodworking or fabrication background just was really helpful in bringing any of my ideas to life. But yeah, I don't know, I think just having an understanding and like a sensitivity to the people that I was trying to approach and what I kind of wanted to make them feel. I don't know, I think just that design thinking from like a conceptual standpoint really sets up any project to kind of go well in that way. I know that's probably not a really great answer, but yeah, like what I had learned from making Welcome and the conversations that happened at that table kind of were like a proof of concept in that way. I was like, oh, you can create a space to do this. And then the Odds and Ends project I did also showed me a way to kind of offer things that I knew about myself to other people that weren't very prescriptive. So I think it's just finding whatever process I think works for you to make that jump from concept to actualization based on what you're trying to achieve or make someone feel. Yeah. Oh yeah, of course.
So from this experience of this museum, based on like your concept and like the work you did,
yeah.
I guess I'm not sure up until that point how much was also like decided. But like how much would you say of like the concept you create became feasible?
Yeah, it's funny. There's a term called value engineering, which is just also the realities of budgets, where things will get value engineered out. But I think for this project, most things were possible, except for maybe some like tech related like media pieces. But I'd say usually at concept, we have a pretty good understanding of what our limitations can be, especially just at local projects, in the fact that we have everyone in-house besides contractors for the most part, or fabricators. We're able to price out a lot of that work in advance to get an understanding of what's actually possible before we even start a lot of the design work, so we can kind of know where our thresholds are. Yeah.
You have a question on Zoom too.
Oh.
This one and then Shannon.
Okay.
Okay. So Bryce says, "Hi, thank you so much for the awesome talk. I was wondering about a couple questions. One, are you intending to commercialize your type? And two, if so, how are you selling it?"
It's on my website, and you can buy it on my website. So it exists there. The license is just a texted document that I wrote that says, "Please don't give it away to other people for free." So there's no license, but yes, it is on my website, and you can buy it.
And Shannon.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Like the project you talked about already, really indicative of this, and I was wondering what the response spaces.
Wait, sorry, what was that last part?
Like the problem spaces that
Yeah.
are developed for this one.
Mm.
And then the second one is like, sometimes I see more like graphic design, like that's just stuff like really more commercial.
Yeah.
And visual spaces are just very experiential and very personal and emotional. So it seems like the way you talk about place and how you incorporate both things together, you seem to be able to personalize both.
Mm.
And like, how do you do that? Like, how is it working for them? And the way you see like characters and bodies and using to experiences.
So you mean like agency experience versus this other more,
Oh no, just like the way.
or just generally speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think, yeah, I don't know. I think in especially just when like you're collaborating with other people, it's advocating for that kind of thinking if it like doesn't already exist, like just in a professional setting. But yeah, I think just from like a process point of view, if I understand your question correctly, of like when you're sourcing type and how you're thinking about it, there's already like just so much visual language that already exists that we all kind of are already consuming, and things that already make us feel like it's something that's trusted or sophisticated, or it's like kind of classic and modern and whatnot, that we can kind of pull on, and having that understanding of these little details of the visual forms. And sometimes it is rooted in history, which is really great just to pull from. But having an understanding of those forms and how they make us feel, or how we can kind of utilize those details, are like what I'm looking for when I'm trying to find like the right typeface. But that is like such a lengthy process. It's like, I mean, someone in their mood video earlier was showing, it's like me crying in front of my computer, just like scrolling indefinitely through all like my thousands of typefaces that I've accumulated on my computer. So that is always like a really hard part of that process. And then your first question was about comfort and problem areas. Yeah. I think it's just about that kind of that similar design sensitivity, and also like kind of, I don't know, knowing to think about that, because a lot of the time we're always trying to create like exciting new spaces. Like I think that we all just kind of hear those words all the time, and it's similar in advocating for the consideration of the kinds of people who will be walking through their space. Because a lot of the time, also in the Courage Museum, or Greenwood Rising, or we have people that are approaching histories, like though we know them from the design end, from like our end, we know them very well. But a lot of the time people are going to be seeing themselves in this work for the first time. And we like kind of have to remind ourselves that all the time, that like we might have been working on it for years, but other people are going to be, it's fresh for them. And how we might have to remind ourselves that we do have to ease them in. So those are kind of problem areas. It's just, I think, maintaining that awareness, because it's so easy just to think of like the hero shot of the gallery space. It's gonna have all these big screens and yeah, just not lose sight of the visitor's well-being.
Another question on Zoom. Is there anything you wish you could change or redesign for the Greenwood project now that it's complete?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think it's funny. I know just from also just being really close to the content team, because we work really close with them. The ending question is something that we all don't like the wording of, because it's just an opportunity for you to contribute your voice, and make a pledge. And the way that the question is worded is like is how will you contribute to create change or contribute to create change and like something to do with restorative justice, but it's very much posed towards honestly towards like what people outside of that community can be doing, which is great. But I don't know. I think that ending question is like, it's a really great move, but some of the wording and whatnot, it's kind of, there's all these little tiny details that obviously as a visitor, like you probably wouldn't notice, but like on the creative end, like will keep us up at night. So yeah, overall though, I think it's a really great reflection, I think, of what the community itself wanted. So I don't know if I would, to change one thing would be to change so many other things. So I don't know if I would actually do that. It would just start like a domino effect of a bunch of other things to change. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So, like you said, like your interest line in creating comfort and like the work we've done, there are lots of like what you said earlier, like what sustainable for the world.
Yeah.
But it seems like in your personal work and a lot of the professional, there's like this relationship between providing that comfort and like often using a lot in like tactile. Do you think there's a relationship between like how you perceive comfort to be more physically versus like I think a lot of times we think about how can we translate that to be, is there kind of a dissonance or some kind of
yeah, that's a good question. I'm so biased just from being someone who I just like tactile solutions. Like even in my job, like I do often have to remind myself that we also do like media interactives, because my solutions are always ways to provide like an analog solution, just because that's like my own tolerance is kind of biased in that way. So I would answer yes, that a lot of physical solutions are kind of the best in that way, because they are able to touch so many more of our senses in experiencing them. Not to say that digital experiences can't do that. I'm trying to think of some, but there's like I've seen other like digital exhibits that have also been incredibly moving. Just the use of sound in and of itself is like so emotionally evocative. But I personally just have a bias towards physical experience in the way that you kind of are able to also walk through a space or walk around something or pick it up, and like just the tactile memory of it. So yeah.
I actually have a question for you as well. So a lot of your projects, it looks like you are learning like new skills in order to do them. I was wondering, like, how do you feel comfortable? How do you know that this is like the right form for your project to take? Like for example, you made like the huggable, like the soft good, and you also made like that box for odds and ends and the tea set.
Yeah.
How do you know going in that this is like the form you want to take and not like something else that you're like already more comfortable in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's like two things in that. Sometimes I think also just as being creative, we do like to kind of do what we know we're good at. I think that's just also like a fundamentally human thing. We all like to do the thing we know we're good at. So I think it's also in giving yourself that space to like make mistakes or fail and also approach something with like beginner's eyes. You really only get to do that so many times. And in doing that, I don't know, I don't think it should ever kind of stop you from trying to discover a new material or medium. But picking the right thing or what actually it may be the form it should take is really hard. I think the junk drawer, some of my original ideas were like, buy a nightstand, cut it in half, like, or just like more crazy things. And then I was like, oh no, it's more about the idea of this like vessel. And so like, to what threshold do I recreate it? Or, yeah, I think, and even with the comfort objects, that was in like all this like kind of crazy research, just in like various theories about like relationship to stuff, and objects, and I think there are just some fundamental things of like people like soft things, and then color theory tells you like yellow makes people happy. It's just little things like that are incredibly simple. I was like, all right, some of those decisions are made for me, which are really great, and so I could pull upon them to use them in that way. So yeah, it is really easy, especially when like everything is kind of your option sometimes. Yeah. It's there. There's no like perfect, no perfect answer, I guess. So
it sounds like you do like a lot of research like into the background, like all this theory as well.
Yeah. If you want your brains to like just ever explode, pretty much every philosopher has like written about thing theory, and I will absolutely butcher it just in retelling it, but it's like by the greatest minds like yelling about inanimate objects, and it's so interesting to read all these different things. But the research I think is just really important because it also tells you the right way to kind of approach these things. That was good for me. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When you made a decision, did that decision make, or is it just like you feel this isn't right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I also just have a bias. I'd like much rather not be on my computer, but I think I often don't start on my computer. I like keeping things in a sketchbook or like just random pieces of paper that I will always like start on. And I also write a lot. That was another thing that as part of my undergrad like experience, I'm very thankful also now, like in the working world, to just be able in verbalizing your ideas. Also just like so much happens there. So that is part of your practice too. That was something that really helped me. So I would often have like a text edit document open, and I also just have like, like just a crazy amount of like random little scraps of like things I was doodling on or drawing on. And then, if the computer served me, of course I would tend to it. And like, I did a lot of bookmaking. So, and as also part of undergrad. So like, I couldn't not do some of that, without using the computer, but it is an incredible tool, but, not to like lean on it when it's not necessary, especially when sometimes those like physical solutions just have that much more, like a human element.
Any other questions? The airport. I just asked one.
Yeah.
Local projects, do they look for interns?
Yeah. So I think at this moment it's like kind of informal, but if anyone, also I'm just gonna put my contact information again on the screen. Also, sorry, this is chaotic. Wow. Okay, this is long. Sorry. Oh, bye. Let me know if you're interested. Totally reach out to me. Also, if you just have any questions, I'm always happy and like very eager to have these conversations. They do have like kind of an informal internship program, but it's not very structured at the moment. I wish it was. Yes, yeah. Especially because if you, obviously from assuming you guys are all from the design school, then it would be in our team that you'd be part of probably. So, yeah.
Thank you, Olivia.
Yeah, thank you guys.